Hi, folks, with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to come to a topic that's been covered sort of many times, but I can't talk enough about it, which is the requirements, the demand, the clamoring for mass immigration, third world peasant mass immigration. Now, there are certain dynamics at work here. And I'd like to, it's not just ideological fanatics, although there are plenty of those. There are other factors at work here. And there's also a spiral, like the dog chasing its tail, or something, a spiral that's creating its own demand that then has to be fulfilled. Once that demand is filled, it then begets yet more demand. And so it just, not spirals out of control, it already has spiraled out of control. And some of this, if you look at all the major political parties, all of them controlled by the globalists, by the way, but if you look at all the major political parties around the Western world, they all advocate for increasing mass migration. There was a party or a part of a political movement in Britain where they were going to get really tough on mass migration and really come down hard on it. And they were going to reduce it from 750,000 all up to something like 250,000, and that to them was getting tough. And their argument was, well, we can't go any less than that because we need all this labour. There's a labour shortage. Now there is no labour shortage, but let's just explore this a little bit more, because it's the same all across the Western world. Wherever the globalists are in charge, mass migration is the thing, which is why the globalists are so terrified about Donald Trump, or someone like Donald Trump getting in, or the AfD in Germany and so on. Now, if the linkage between mass migration, cost of living, not being able to find workers that can work for that wage, that sort of thing, then if that was dealt with, then the demand for mass immigration would decline considerably, if not go away altogether. So let's have a look at those dynamics that are at play. And again, I've gone over some of these things before, but you look at pretty much anybody, any employer that wants low-paid, minimum wage labour. Now, if that minimum wage labour is you can be utterly and completely illiterate in any language, let alone English, but your own language, and the job is very, very simple, and you're prepared to employ someone to like a foreman or an overseer or a supervisor that speaks that peasant third world person's language, then you can employ people at that level. But it's not that many jobs that could do it. You need some English and at least some. So, and remember, a lot of these people from the third world, they not only are they illiterate in their own language, they've never actually had a job ever. So when you get that, and they've got an IQ of 80 or 75, and it's pretty tough to do something like those people, anything other than the absolute simplest repetitive tasks. So you still need some English and this sort of thing, but anyone that's advertising for general labourers and that sort of thing, particularly if it's away from the major transport links, or it's away from the major population centres, then the low-paid jobs, for the low-paid jobs, employers have got a real problem getting that. The reasons are sort of, I'll just address a few of them here. If it's away from transport links, then remember, this is absolute bare bottom, entry level, lowest wage of the wage. Then the people, they have to run a motor vehicle if they're going to get to the job. That's a big expense for someone on the actual bare bones type thing. Also, the price of petrol or gasoline is today is very high. So the cost of getting, owning the car, keeping it on the road, registering it, petrol and service and maintenance, this is a huge expense for someone on the entry level wage. So so they prefer labouring jobs in the transport links, along major transport links, and that are fairly close by. For example, if you're doing, say, a trip from out of Sydney into the city, a round trip, that can, depending on how far, it can cost you $20 a day just in public transport. So again, that's a huge expense for someone on the absolute bare bones wage. So they can't afford that. So it's only jobs, the super low pay jobs on a transport link and near a major population centre where there's a lot of forests of apartments where they can live, 10, 15 to a one bedroom apartment, 20 plus to a two bedroom apartment, and so on. So it's those entry level wages. So it's quite common to see people moaning and groaning on online or on the business websites in Australia, saying, I have to advertise for weeks to get a basic labourer, just someone to do the super low level grunt work, and I might only get one applicant a week or one applicant a fortnight, and it takes me forever. And half the applicants turn up and they've got some sort of handicap and so on. So now let's look at the other side of it, where the better paid jobs. Now these are jobs that are, say, paying between 3 and 4 times the average wage, which in Sydney isn't a lot anymore. But there was a time when you could really get ahead on that sort of wage, but not anymore. Those days are long gone. 3 to 4 times an average wage, you can't really get ahead on that in Sydney anymore. But it does allow you, a decent independent living. But that's all. Now, you look at the just the people that I come across, where they've got they're advertising on the the internet job boards and so on. They're advertising a job that pays between 3 and 4 times the average wage. They can get 200 or 200 plus applications for the job. So let's just put this in perspective. The entry-level wage job, where the majority of people, there's vastly more people, would be at that end of the pay scale than the other are. So at the entry, they're getting 1 applicant a week, and even then, even though they've lowered the standard of what they're prepared to hire, they're still struggling. I can't employ you, buddy. Sorry, you're just you're even below the low standard that we're prepared to accept. Whereas in like 3 to 4 times the average wage, which in reality should have, at the minimum wage end, you've got 50% of the workers. At the 3 to 4 times the average wage, you've got 5% of the workers, and yet you get 250 applications for the well-paid job, where in theory there are far fewer people not in theory, in practice, there are far fewer. So we're looking at this so that there's either a massive oversupply of qualified people, which is possible, a massive oversupply of qualified people, all chasing a diminishing number of jobs in the better paid categories, which I accept is a probability or a likelihood. Whereas in the lower end, people can't afford to work for that sort of wage. You have to live communally. Now, if you're a white person, like an Indigenous Australia, you've been, grew up in Australia, or you live in Australia, you had white parents, this sort of thing, you've got no comprehension of communal living. For most people, I'm sure there's some outliers, but you've got no comprehension of communal living. Why would you want to live in a 1-bedroom apartment with 10 other people or 15 other people? I mean, you wouldn't. Why would you want to live in have a bedroom a small compact bedroom where you've got 3 levels of bunk beds, you've got 6 people living in that bedroom, and so on? You just wouldn't do that. And there's bunk beds in the kitchen. But if you come from a third world country, it's quite normal for large families to live together, in a 1-room place. It's quite normal for 15 or 20 people to live in the 1-bedroom, the grass hut or the mud hut or so on. So when they come to the West, not only are they still living that way, but they get a flushing toilet and electricity and running water, things that they might have to walk 3 or 4 miles to get to the nearest fucking water well. But here they can just, they've got it water piped right into their apartment. So, and right outside the front door, there are buses and trains and public transport that run every 15 minutes. Not like where they were, where there may be one public transport link, twice a week. So to them, it's a huge step up. and they would take those and do take those labouring jobs, the minimum, bare bones entry level of the entry level jobs. They do take those, and they live communally, and as a result, they're able to do okay. Now the message is, I don't think there'd be a government that would get elected in Australia. They're going to the way we're all going to live here now is the same as third world peasants. But really, the writing was on the wall years ago when the first sort of generation of spruikers, pushing the globalization thing. And I remember, and I've mentioned this previously, a guy at one some guy being paid multi-million dollars a year and married into lots of money and is never going to have to worry about anything, telling us all that in the West now, Western workers will have to compete directly with third world peasants as workers, and either we're going to have to work a lot more hours for the same pay or have a much lower standard of living because we're now competing with peasants, and that's it. And if you don't like it too bad, you just got to suck it up. So those prophecies and those sort of prognostications, they've definitely come to pass. Not necessarily wages have gone down, wages have gone up, but the cost of living has gone up much faster than wages have. So that's the first dynamic because the second dynamic to look at is that a lot of businesses, lower paid businesses are being bought up by offshore interests, whether Chinese or Indian, Indians buying up take-out food chains or franchises, or buying up the whole franchise operation, and then only giving it to their Indian flunky buddies and that sort of stuff. So these businesses then import vast numbers of peasants from wherever they come from to come in and do the work, flip the burgers and wash the dishes and so on. And these organisations also buy up. They've got vast real estate interests, so they put their peasant workers into these apartments that they own, the real estate portfolio. They put them in there, and then they say part of their salary or income is rent, so they can pay them, a quarter of the minimum wage, because it's all packaged up with rent and food and transport and so on. Or so they would, in their dodgy, flaky accounting, they would do that. So these they're able to employ workers at well below the minimum wage, and this artificially then dampens wages in that sector. White people can't get jobs there. They might have a token white person, but white people can't get jobs in these places. So it's a job only open to illiterate third world peasants and countrymen of the owners of the businesses. But on top of that, they because they're not getting a full commercial rent, they're able to claim tax and say that all these properties they own are losing money, which they then use to offset tax in other areas of their property and business empire. So these places, using offshore finance, they don't pay any tax at all. So it's a massive scam. So effectively, actually, tax money or tax revenue is being stolen from the Australian people and used to artificially subsidise businesses that are simply not competitive in any commercial sense. Now, coming to the issue of the cost of living ratio, because there's so many people in any commercial sense. Now, coming to the issue of the cost of living ratio, because there's so many people coming in, and because now the way the economy is structured, wealth is all accruing to the share owning and property owning class. It's not the productive class that's producing is accruing wealth. For example, if you've got a business that it could be a manufacturing business, for example. If you employ a manufacturing manager to run the business for you, they're likely to be paid well less than half what a diversity officer is paid. And if you look at say, and I've mentioned again this many times, the diversity director for a university will be paid somewhere around $500,000 a year, whereas the chief engineer for a large civil engineering, bridge building, road building project will be paid half that. So we're looking at very, very very different pay. Pay is accruing to, well, the property owning and share owning class, or not pay but wealth. But they are due to the globalization ideology, people like diversity officers and community engagement officers and people who on the lookout for white supremacist Nazis that are everywhere, they get paid vastly more than productive people do. Productive people get paid far less now relative to cost of living and relative to these other jobs like diversity officers than they ever used to. And 3-day-a-week NGO agitators, where their only job is to turn out placard wavers on the street, they're paid 3 or 4 times the average wage just for working 3 days a week as an agitator on behalf of the globalists. So there's a number of dynamics at play here, and it needs a reset, because the wider the gap between pay and cost of living gets, the greater the demand for peasant slave labour. And let's call it what it is. It's tantamount to slave labour. And the Western governments everywhere just looking the other way and letting this happen. But if every worker says, no, you can't package it up anymore with, you can't pay your worker anymore packaged up with accommodation and so on, or food, you actually have to pay them the proper wage, then that would change a lot of things. And it would stop this incentive for mass migration to beget more mass migration, in turn creating demand for more mass migration. And the solution to people, companies not being able to hire workers is everyone I've spoken to, their first thing is that more mass migration is needed. Mass migration is high, well, fine, it's high, but I can't get cheap workers to come and work at my place. Therefore, more mass migration is needed, and then more again, and then more again, and on it goes. And when the reality is, why are we not going to the government and saying, hey, look, the cost of living is out of control relative to wages? Or the government can directly subsidise, some of these wages. I mean, I don't agree with that, by the way, but that would be another way of doing it. Or the employer can provide other benefits to the employees. But again, that gets away from the real material point here. Is the job just doesn't pay enough because the cost of living is so high. Now, in most areas of Sydney, if not all, it's illegal for above, like if you're in a 1-bedroom apartment, the local ordinances and various laws and bylaws say that only 4 people can live in a 1-bedroom apartment maximum. 2 of those have to be minors, so 2 adults and 2 children. That's the maximum that can live there. So when you get 17 Pakistanis or some third world peasants living in the apartment, then that the council and various groups should be in there enforcing the laws, but they don't. They're very strict on enforcing laws on a white person that says something negative about, I don't know, transgender or whatever. But when it comes to these laws being broken, nobody cares. Everybody looks the other way. So there are a whole lot of things that feed into this. But the fundamental material point of it is that while the gap between cost of living and pay, particularly at the lower end, and there's more and more jobs that are falling into that subsistence wage category now, and the solution isn't mass migration, it's to adjust the equation between cost of living and pay, and that relationship used to be pretty good. When you've got, say, in 1969, 1970, 75, pretty much anybody with a full-time job could afford to buy a basic house, nothing fancy, a basic house, a very basic entry-level car, and support a dependent wife and 2.5 children. That's on just an average, basic wage. And the difference between the average wage and the minimum wage was very small, at that time. Now there's quite a difference there, but nonetheless, the idea is that the relationship between wages and cost of living, it was always reasonably sort of in kilter there. You did have times of different, say some sort of apocalyptic event, famine or whatever, where that paradigm would change. But basically, it's only been since the globalists have taken control that it's been engineered and orchestrated, where the difference between cost of living and wages has widened, and particularly where the number of minimum pay jobs has increased, to a crazy degree. But then we've got the issue where there's far fewer skilled, high IQ, knowledge-based jobs. There's far fewer of those, and of the ones that do exist, there's a massive number of applications for them. How can you get no applications for a minimum wage job, but get 250 for a well-paid job, where clearly high skills are needed? There aren't 250 people who can do that fucking job. Now, a lot of those people may be, wishful thinkers or eternal optimists or gamblers having a crapshoot. I don't know, but the idea is that, and the way it always used to be, that if you had a high skill, and I've been in human resource departments, on temporary assignment on bigger multinational firms I worked for back in the day, and I remember the high skilled jobs. I remember there was a director of engineering at this place, in the 80s that I was involved in the hiring, and we were lucky to get. We ran the advert for months, and it cost very expensive to do it in those days. And we ran the advert for months and got hardly any applicants. It was a very high skill job, and there were a limited number of people with those exceptional skills, and the company had to lower the bar until they reached the sort of the sweet spot where they would get a sufficient number of applicants in order to get someone to fill the role. But that's how it was then. Today, it's the complete reverse. Now, also, if you put out an advert back then for a labourer type job, you would get killed in the rush. I mean, there'd be a gazillion people, and this is while unemployment was 3% or something. You'd be killed in the rush of people wanting the job. Now, it could be because they lived nearby or because it was better transport link. I mean, there are other factors there, just other than just the job itself. But you used to get a lot of applicants, and the further up the wage food chain you went, the fewer the number of applicants. Now it's the complete reverse. You've been with Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for listening.